So thanks to everybody for being here, friends of Phoenix and Phoenix Landing, and thank you, Jason. I can never be grateful enough for all you're doing for birds. So enjoy, everyone.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for all you do. I appreciate everybody being on today. We know that how people view nutrition is controversial. And so over the past 25 years, as I've fed birds and really worked through a continued collaboration over the past 20 years with Dr. Karen Becker, and I know many of you probably follow Dr. Karen Becker, as she's the most followed integrative veterinarian on the planet with over 2 million followers now. She is making some unbelievable strides when it comes to whole food feeding with all animals, not just our birds. And so I owe a lot to her because she has really been such a wonderful collaborator over the past 2 decades with me. Just to start off, this picture here is of Cricket, and Cricket was my first green arisari that we raised for our education program. And Cricket, like all toucans and lorikeets and lories and starlings and mynas and other species that are now coming to light, are prone to iron storage disease, and they get that through diet. So she was diagnosed with iron storage disease, and thanks to Dr. Becker and some interventions when it came to diet, we prolonged her life 3.5 years beyond her diagnosis, which is unheard of. Usually they're gone within a few months. And so you'll hear some of the things that we did with her and other birds to use food as treatment. So, to prolong their lives and give them a better quality of life. As Anne just talked, I do a lot of different things when it comes to science. I'm a zoo consultant. I work with several different zoos. And I have worked with many zoos in the past as well. I worked with Dr. Jean Dubach, who's in the top center there, at the Wildlife Genetics Lab outside of Chicago, where we do animal genetics type things, looking at wild populations as well as zoo populations, monitoring for genetic diversity, and who's the best pairing with the best partner, things along that line. I work with the Avian Preservation and Education Conservancy, which is APEC. They're at avianpec.org. And that we're drawing blood from wild starlings there. That's Dr. Carolina Stethian out of Florida, who's doing amazing work both here and in the wild for parrots. And I do education programs with our birds. And so my mainstay right now is that I'm a professor at St. Xavier University outside of Chicago, where I teach different biology courses, including the zoo biology course, which looks at nutrition, husbandry, diagnostics, things like that, in preparing younger people to go into an animal care job of some kind. And so you'll probably see some of that influence in here as well. So the main question that I start every talk with, and I have done this talk, I cannot tell you the number of times, and this is actually a talk that I give to veterinary schools when I'm invited to speak on nutrition. And the question is, are your animals thriving or are they just surviving? Now, when it comes to our animals, we see them constantly. We see them every day. So when problems surface, sometimes they're so subtle that we just kind of don't recognize them until it's too late, especially with birds that tend to hide some symptoms at times. And so my goal is always to make sure that my animals are thriving, which is far away from surviving. And surviving is always right on the cusp of disease. I don't want them on the cusp of disease. I want them to be thriving. And, we've all seen birds that are just surviving. And we get frustrated sometimes because we're like, we need to change things to make this bird's life better, but we don't know what to do. And it can be, it can cost a lot of money to do it. But I am of the camp that thinks that if we can offer them a healthy diet that offers antioxidants and things like that that are going to keep the body healthy long term, that creates the foundation for everything else. Will a bird improve if it gets more enrichment and things like that? Of course. But it's hard to improve if you don't have the right nutrients in the body. And so that's got to come first. There is no such thing as a complete avian diet. We have hundreds of different species of parrots in our care. To say that one complete diet will feed all of those birds with all of their different needs is fiction. That just can't happen. So anything that says it's a complete diet, I immediately run away from, because it's not true. There has been lots of commercially available foods where that claim has been made. And because we don't know whether that's true or not, they can't say otherwise, right? We can't argue that. So it is really important that birds have many, many, many different types of foods each day, many, many different types of colors, textures, things of that sort. Now, I will say that the wild is a really rough place for a bird to live. And we can do better than that. We can give them a much better life that doesn't have predators looking for them all the time, and they're not loaded with parasites all the time. The wild is a rough place. As a biologist, I know this. And so my job is to keep them higher than that surviving. I want them thriving in my care. And so that's a constant focus of mine. So we know that organisms make choices. They make choices every day. And choices can be life or death in the wild. Not so much in our care. But organisms survive in the wild by looking for the foods that are available. They also are in constant competition with other organisms wanting those same foods. So birds, for example, parrots, in many different regions, will eat unripe things so that they can get some food before the primates come in who prefer the riper foods, for example. So there's lots of different things going on in lots of different areas. So but we know that we want to offer some choices. Diversity in the diet is going to allow pets to make choices based on what their changing needs are. You don't know what the different needs are, how they vary from day to day, from week to week, from season to season. Like, we don't know what those changes are, those changing needs are. So we can offer diversity so they have the choices they need. So we're constantly covering our bases. Birds make their choices not how we see the world, but on how they see the world. And so birds will view things based on UV light reflectance off of foods, and that tells them whether the fruit is ready or not to consume, or whatnot. And so we have to stop buying things that we think look cool because the birds are going to look at them the same way, because they don't. So we have to constantly think that birds are viewing the world very differently than we are. We cannot replicate their wild diets until that Star Trek replicator technology comes in, where you just tell them you want something and then it shows up. We can't replicate their diets. So we want to offer as much diversity so that they're getting the greatest span of nutrients that we can in a day, or a week, or a month. Micromanaging is not the answer. I have talked to people who have tried to put every food they have offered their bird into an Excel spreadsheet and look at balancing the amino acid profile and all that sort of thing. If your bird eats 100% of what's in its bowl, it's still hungry. So and if 100% actually goes down its throat, down its esophagus, I would love to meet this bird, because we know that 90% of the food ends up on the floor, right? I mean, or on my walls or whatever. And so to say that we're offering birds a balanced diet, you know, and they're getting everything they need is, once again, a myth. We need to start offering as much diversity as we can, and then, you know, hope for the best. And I will say, any bird will eat what you want it to. But it's not about changing the bird's behavior. It's about changing your behavior, human behavior. You have to change how you're doing things and how you're offering things in order to get the bird to eat things. And so that is, I'll offer a little bit of advice later on regarding that. But any bird will eat what you want it to if you're persistent and experimental enough. And one theme you'll see throughout this talk today is that keeping birds is a scientific experiment that never ends. You are constantly testing things to see what your birds will do, what their preferences are, those sorts of things. And so we have to look at that as a constant venture, a lifelong venture, that where we're constantly you know, testing things to see what we can get our birds eating and doing. So, like I said, I've been doing nutrition talks, especially for zoos, for a while. This is the top picture is a zoo staff in California that I was talking to, and you know, really focusing on what those different items are that we can be offering to get them more apt to try new things. We're always looking at species appropriateness, biological appropriateness. You know, we know what parrots' beaks are for, so how do we capitalize on that to get them, you know, eating? And what do they eat in the wild, and how do they eat it in the wild, so that we can somewhat mimic that type of those types of items in our homes. And then Dr. Becker's at the bottom. We have been both speaking quite a bit about this and really challenging the some of the status quo, which is why there's some controversy around avian nutrition. So when I do a consult, I look at the environment, and if you want to look at this picture, this this image is from a very large zoo that I did a consult for. These are golden conures. And I look at the environment as a whole. So what sorts of things do you notice when you look at this? And you can just put those in the chat. What sorts of things do you notice from just this image? Oh, you're all quick. Yep. So the feather quality is something that keeps coming up in the chat, and that's definitely an issue. They have poor feather quality. If you've ever seen a golden conure, Queen of Bavaria conure, they are sleek, yellow, gorgeous birds. And they definitely should not look like this. So this is the reason that I was called in for the consult. So when I looked at the environment first, I saw some things that needed to change. One is the lighting. There was halogen lighting in there, and they didn't have any natural light or anything like that. So the lighting was an issue. The foraging objects that they had in there, the toys, were not used. So either they were not in a suitable place, or they didn't have the right type of foraging materials for these birds. Zoos almost always do a really good job with enrichment, and they offer it because it's required. It's part of their programs. But these two were put into this temporary exhibit, and they weren't responding very well. So they have natural branches, but they also are sibling birds, and they have a nest box, and the nest box was strictly for enrichment. It was not their it was actually fixed to the wall for the primates that were in there prior to this housing. And it wasn't meant to stay in there. And so they were over preening each other and you know, causing all kinds of issues. And so, you know, they really wanted to improve the lives of these birds. So I looked at the diet. And then after I stopped crying, because the diet was pretty poor. It was all ultra processed pellets and one fresh food item per day, and no tree nuts at all. And these birds desperately need fat, like most parrots do. So, or all parrots do in some amounts. But so we talked about diversifying the diet. And so they diversified it, but they gave a different pellet every day and one pine nut per day per bird. And I said, okay, we need to work on this. So we started increasing the amount of whole foods, and they got better, and their feather quality improved within months, and their behavior improved. They were much more calmer and well adjusted based on the daily behavior observations that zookeepers do. And so they turned the birds around. But the reason was that their staff veterinarian was not a bird specialist, didn't know. And it's hard to find a nutrition specialist who's going to know everything about birds. So it's a challenge, not just in a zoo, but just anywhere. And it's not just our birds. You know, we have accepted this as the norm when it comes to dogs. And I see dogs every single day, and I look at them, and I know the owners don't think anything's wrong, but their fur coat, their coat's poor, their digestion's poor, like everything is just off. And when you're only feeding an ultra processed food, you don't get good quality health in an animal. It's just not possible. And so we have, you know, and like I said, this is the norm. And part of it is that we are educated as a public by the wrong people. And so this is something that Dr. Becker is really working against, and so that she can improve the lives of dogs and cats and other carnivores as well. So, and it's not just those commonly kept pets. This is Dr. Becker with one of my tortoises. And if you look at the shape of these shells, you can tell they're very sloped. All right, these are all healthy animals, and this is not a healthy animal. This is, we call it pyramiding, and this is inappropriate diet from, this turtle was on a tortoise pellet, and they said that it was complete, so that's all they ever fed it. Though it got some grass now and then. And so this is something we see a lot of when it comes to tortoises. Other animals that are kept as pets, like hedgehogs. Hedgehogs are the kind of a commonly kept exotic pet now, but they are prone to oral cancer. And almost all of them die of oral tumors, and the owner almost never knows that they have these oral tumors beforehand. And so, because they usually don't show like this one does. And so when I talk to hedgehog breeders, they'll say, oh, they live about 5 or 6 years. And I said, well, I just had one that was almost 10. But I don't feed kibble. I don't feed cat food or, you know, any kind of ultra processed food to hedgehogs. And so, you know, you get to that idea. Rabbits and guinea pigs, same thing. They get all kinds of kidney and liver issues and things like that if they're not being fed whole food. So raw foods, regardless of the animals we're looking at, are important. This is an Amur tiger, and this was at a zoo in Chicago, oldest tiger in captivity, over 20 years old. They lived till about 9 or 10 in the wild. Amur leopards over here, the one on the left was geriatric, she was 25, but a really great quality of life. They live about half that in the wild. Penguins, the one with the red band here is Satan, And Satan lived until she was 40, oldest penguin in captivity. And then some of you may have heard of Cookie Cockatoo, and that was a bird that passed away just a few years ago at the Chicago Zoological Society. He was at least 83 years old. Was there when the zoo opened in the 30s. And so we know that feeding a lot of raw whole food in its normal state, which all of these animals have in common, is important. So my talk is going to focus on birds today, and we're going to talk a little bit about the F word, which is fats. You know, some people really think poorly of fats, but we all need it, and all animals need a different, the different types of fats in their diet. Carbohydrates, and there's some carbohydrates that just aren't beneficial, like sugars that are added to processed foods, especially. And then proteins are needed as well. So let's start with fats. The good fats are both facilitated, which are considered saturated, monosaturated, polyunsaturated fats, things like that. They call those facilitated fats. And those often are in foods because they improve the taste and the texture of the food. They're used for a quick energy source, and they're needed by cells for a host of different things in the body. They also are needed in order to absorb those fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. And usually we can store these pretty easily. Some of you have heard about coconut oil, and it's there's controversy over coconut oil. I have no idea why, because it's just amazing stuff that is great for birds. It's great for us, and it has so many different benefits. And then functional fats, which have to be supplied in the diet, but are also one of the most difficult things to get in the diet. Now, I'll talk a little bit about where you get these fats from shortly. The fats that we don't want to feed our animals, regardless of what animal it is, are rancid and oxidized fats, which means they've been processed and sat in a bag on a shelf for a long time. Rendered fats, hydrogenated fats, recycled or reheated fats, all of these things you'd find in processed food. Basically anything processed you want to avoid, because the heat denatures and alters these nutritional compounds. Now, essential fats have to be eaten. They have to be in the diet, and birds require a substantial amount, even if they're not flying miles every day. This is a myth that I hear perpetuated quite a bit, that, our birds should never have tree nuts because they're not flying miles every day, burning it off. Birds have the highest resting metabolic rate. Resting, meaning if they're just sitting in a cage all day, they still have a high metabolic rate. Should birds be exercising? Absolutely. Can they exercise without flight? Of course they can. Most of the day, a bird is climbing around in trees. We can totally have them do that, make them do that in some way. But to avoid fat, because they're not going to quote unquote burn it all off, is not true. Essential fats are used for a host of different things in cells to keep cells healthy. Now, dogs and cats should have an animal fat source that's unprocessed. So, raw meat diets that are properly balanced and created are best, because they get raw animal fat in that, and dogs and cats have evolved to eat those things specifically. But birds need plant-based fats. So they need them for normal reproduction. That means not laying eggs just because, right? Or poor skin quality, or feather quality, or immune disorders and things like that. Animal bodies run on those fats. Those things are made from these fats. So we definitely need to make sure that we have them. Like I said, they help us absorb some of those vitamins. They have to be supplied in the diet. And if these fats are extracted, and put into a food, let's just say, they are basically rendered useless if they're heated in any way, if they're exposed to light, if they're exposed to oxygen, sitting on a shelf for a long period of time, just over time they break down. Any type of processing, even agitation. So if you were to buy, let's just say, a cold pressed oil from a health food store like flaxseed oil, even shaking the bottle vigorously could start having that process, that oil, that fat denature. And so we have to be really careful with the sources of these fats. When you buy an oil, it should be from a refrigerated section at a health food store. It should be in an enclosed brown bottle, and I'll show you some options for those. So omega-3s you probably have heard of. Omega-3 fatty acids, they're needed to keep your cells healthy. They're needed for eicosanoids, and those are basically manager hormones in the cells that regulate other hormones that are coming and going. And I'm sure none of you have ever had a bird with hormonal surges or any kind of hormonal imbalance. We see that often. But that happens when those managers aren't on duty, those eicosanoids. And so if we're not giving them the proper nutrition, we're not giving them the ability to produce those regulators that keep cells balanced and healthy. And then regulating the immune response as well. I see more and more birds with immune response disorders, and it's really important that they have these good healthy fats so that their immune system is optimal. And there's been more in the news about this recently with COVID-19 and how we can help support our immune systems by providing our bodies with healthy fats and things like that. Deficiencies in omega-3s cause all kinds of problems. Stunted growth. I see this in different types of birds at times. Blue and gold macaws, I see small blue and gold macaws because they weren't getting the fats when they were hand reared, or the parents didn't feed them feed the right things because they weren't offered the right things. And so, it's important that they have those good healthy fats so that cells can divide and make more cells and the animal can grow normally. Vision is an issue, motor and coordination, and then, like I said, immune dysfunction. Things like allergies and tumors and things like that are so common among pet birds, and we just tend to say, oh, they're allergic to this. Okay. And same thing with dogs. We hear a lot of people say their dogs are allergic to chicken. Well, they're allergic to processed chicken, but they wouldn't be allergic to raw whole chicken, raw whole prey, which is what the dogs really should be eating anyway. And so those sorts of things are a result of not getting that healthy fat in their diet. So some of the animals that we've worked with, you have to consider what is biologically appropriate. Do they need an animal-based fat, or do they need a plant-based fat? Penguins, like this one on the left, and yes, that penguin bit me after this picture was taken, they usually do. They do it out of love, I'm sure, but penguins need animal-based fat, so they get whole prey, whole fish, whole crustaceans, things like that. Where the goose on the right gets a plant-based, so they get different types of seeds and things like that, grasses that will provide that omega-3 resource. So the different types of fats are eicosapentaenoic fats, which are called EPA, and docosahexaenoic fat, which are DHA. And those you get from animals, or you get plant-based ALA, which is alpha-linoleic acid. And this is converted into these if you're an animal. Now, one really great source to get these from, and this is once again changing your behavior, not your bird's behavior, are mealworms. And mealworms are actually an awesome source. They're awesome enrichment. All birds can have them. And they have great fat profiles. They have great protein. And recent research within the last couple of years has shown that if you leave mealworms in the sun, even for 15 to 20 minutes, that they will start producing vitamin D3 which then your birds can consume, which is great if they don't get natural sunlight all the time. And so these different fats are all great for birds, and there's different sources to get them from. Omega-6s we need for healthy skin and feathers, production of healthy, strong feathers that come with a shaft that's normal and grows properly, normal reproductive functioning. Once again, balance, hormonal balancing, proper organ function, especially those filtering organs like kidneys and liver. A deficiency in these fats usually results in a bird that can't gain weight properly, or even maintain a body mass that's normal. The keel sticks out, things like that. Liver and kidney problems, behavior issues. I'm sure none of you have experienced those before. Poor wound healing, infertility, poor coat and feather development, and then scaly skin and dermatitis. All things that we would, pair with a low-fat diet that's not giving the birds what they actually need. Now, there's a reason why we need both of these, because it's about balance. Now, to try and balance your birds' diets so they're getting the right proportion of omega-3s and omega-6s is impossible. It's really, really difficult. But they need to get omega-3s from whole, unprocessed food. Omega-3s do not survive processing. And that is one of the most critical nutrients that they need to survive and thrive. And so we need omega-6s, which we can get from sunflower seeds, which are not the devil. But, the real problem is not feeding a diet that is predominantly any one food item. Sunflower seeds have a bad reputation, even though they're extremely nutritious, because that was the predominant food item in most bird diets a while ago. And so now people are told that sunflower seeds are the devil. They're not the devil. A few sunflower seeds a day are great. They offer all kinds of nutrients. You can look up on the Google and see the nutrients that they carry with them. But they shouldn't be the whole part of a diet, nor should anything, nothing, no one food item should make up the majority of the diet. There should be a lot of diversity in the diet. So what do we offer? Now, places where you can get omega-6s are seeds and nuts. Soy offers omega-6s, but I don't offer soy to any animal, including myself, mainly because of the phytoestrogens, and it's just not necessary. So I avoid soy altogether, even though, and the reason I put it in here is if you're looking at labels, there may be soy in there, there may be soybeans, so avoid things with that in them. But seeds and nuts tree nuts are great. Omega-3s you can get from tree nuts. Brazil nuts, pecans, walnuts, hazelnuts, and pine nuts are the best. Walnuts are in the top 20 according to the FDA as far as omega-3s, but they're also great sources of fiber. And for those of you that have ever read anything about gut flora, the microbiome, those bacteria and microbes in the guts of animals help run the body. They help keep the animal healthy. And I was working with some microbiome scientists at Howard Hughes Medical Institute a couple years ago, and they all came to the same conclusion. Fiber is really important to keep the microbiome healthy. And so those natural fiber, like what's in tree nuts, is really good for you. It's really good for the birds. Should the birds have a ton of these every day? Of course not, but they shouldn't have a ton of anything every day. There should be as much diversity as possible. One thing we also do is we soak tree nuts out of the shell overnight, and that increases their digestibility. And so you can do that if you're sprouting and things like that as well. Green pumpkin seeds are great. They offer a nice fat complement, as do flaxseed, borage, hemp, and primrose oils. Now, like I said earlier, if you're buying oils to supplement your bird's diet for any reason, They should be purchased in a refrigerated section. Whole Foods markets, things like that, they have whole refrigerated sections with these oils in them. And they need to be kept cold. They need to not allow light to penetrate, obviously. And despite what the label says, you use it up over weeks and not months. You need to use this up because even in the refrigerator, it will lose its, the omega-3s will denature over time. But they're still not processed, which means they're active. They're going to be helpful to your birds. And like I said, insects. We offer a lot of freeze-dried mealworms and crickets to our birds as part of their dry mix in the evening. Because freeze-drying maintains about 90%-ish of the nutrients versus dehydrated, which you lose a lot. So it is important that if you're going to feed insects that aren't alive, that you offer them freeze-dried and not dehydrated. And then for dogs, cats, and birds of prey, and I do add these pieces in because I know most of us can't say no to one animal. We have to have multiple, but the same thing goes for them. Omega-6s are readily available in raw meat diets. You can buy these commercially in the frozen food section at your local pet store. There are more and more chains are even carrying high quality dog foods like this or cat foods. Omega-3s are not in poultry, so if you're feeding your dogs or cats a raw chicken diet or a raw turkey diet, you do need to vary it with other types of meat so that they're getting those omega-3s. Okay, so nuts. Nuts are fun. For larger birds, they love to crack them, and that's what their beak is for. So they should be given that choice. They're low in saturated fat. They're cholesterol-free. Tree nuts do not have cholesterol. And they, like I said earlier, they're a great source of protein and fiber. They also contain trace minerals that are hard to get in other foods, as well as phytonutrients, which act as antioxidants and keep cells healthy. Tree nuts in general are about 90% polyunsaturated, what they consider one of the healthiest fats out there. And that helps maintain a healthy weight. Tree nuts are not going to make your birds fat. We tend to think that if they eat fat, they're going to get fat, and that's just not true. Sugar in the liver is converted to fat, and that's what in a process called lipogenesis. And so we don't want to offer tons of sugars that are going to be converted to fat. We want to offer good healthy fats that they can then use as well. So when you offer, depending on the size of your bird, if they can't do in shell, crack the shells and let them extract the nut meat from the shell themselves. Let them do some of the work. If research has taught us anything, it's that animals like to work for their food. They want to forage. So we need to give them and train them to be good foragers. We feed raw nuts, no salt, or like I said, if the nuts look like this in the picture, you can literally throw them in some cool water, let them sit overnight, drain them, rinse them, and feed them the next day. And that increases their digestibility. Some people that have digestion issues when it comes to nuts do the same thing. They soak the nuts, they rinse them the next morning, and then they can eat them just like that. Now, peanuts are not a nut, they are a legume. Peanuts have a host of different issues where we just don't need to offer them. They have a pretty poor fat profile. They can carry fungal toxins like aflatoxin and things like that. So not only do I not feed peanuts, but I make sure that I don't feed anything with peanuts in it. And so, some of the healthiest, quote unquote, healthiest foods available out there have organic peanuts as part of their formulation, and that is not good. So I avoid peanuts and peanut products altogether when it comes to birds. Okay, carbs, which we all love, right? We love this top picture, all of those comfort foods. But those refined carbs are not good for us, and we know that they put unnecessary weight on us. whole foods are going to offer a whole different set of carbohydrates that are going to serve as an energy source. And with birds' metabolic rates, they need some good quality carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, like what you see in fruits and vegetables, are broken down into sugars. And then that fiber that's indigestible is actually used by the bacteria in the gut, which is part of the microbiome. So once again, you know, in our culture, at least in the United States, it tends to be if a little is good, a lot must be better, and that's not the case. You should not be feeding too much of any one food item per day. So nuts are healthy, absolutely. Should they have an entire handful of nuts in a day? Absolutely not. They should have so many different foods that they're not going to consume too much of any one thing. And that goes for grains as well. Birds can, of course, have grains, but too much, not recommended. So if it's part of a diverse diet, you don't have those problems. And then legumes, especially sprouting them. So there's not many legumes you can sprout successfully and safely. The only legumes you can sprout safely are things like any of the lentils. Lentils are great. You can just soak them and feed them, or you can soak and sprout them. And then as far as beans, the only ones that you can soak and sprout are adzuki beans, mung beans, and garbanzos. All the other beans that come in like the soup mixes and things like that, those you should not be soaking and sprouting. It's just not enough, which is why people tend to have to cook them in order to consume them. And if we have to cook them, I'm not feeding them to the birds. And so just those, and I will talk about the beans again later, but the 3 beans that you can safely soak and sprout are mung, adzuki, and garbanzos. Sorry, there's a little delay. Okay, and then obviously fruits and vegetables. Vegetables can make up the bulk of an animal diet, a parrot diet, I should say, but lots of different types of vegetables should be involved. And then protein. Protein is part of every cell, so we have to give birds the building blocks for those proteins, which are amino acids. And protein is going to make up the majority of the animal's weight. So muscle, and where we normally feel birds to see how their weight is around their keel, because those pectoral muscles are really important for birds for flight. And so if those muscles aren't there in a normal way, they need to have more protein. But you have to be really, really picky about the type of proteins that you're offering. We need proteins to manage hormones. We need proteins. Enzymes are actually different types of proteins. And we need those enzymes to help with digestion and other types of chemical reactions that go on in cells to keep them healthy every day, and making more cells as well. But you have to look at bioavailability when it comes to proteins. A lot of commercially available pet foods use things like corn gluten meal. Now, corn gluten meal is a protein that's manufactured, almost all of it comes out of China, and it's cheap. So animal food producers will throw corn gluten meal in so that the protein percentage goes up on the label, but it is not digestible, it is not useful, and causes problems. We've had birds who have had gout and other things, liver issues, as a result. So using whole foods for their protein sources are really, really important. So like I said before, beans, nuts, and legumes are ideal sources for proteins, but they need to be soaked and sprouted if they're beans. So beans need to be soaked and sprouted, but like I said, mung, adzuki, and garbanzos, those are really the only 3 safe beans to fully soak and sprout to consume. Not only for our birds, but for us as well. And then for carnivores, uncooked animal sources are really, really important. Dogs and cats. It should not be kibble to the point, meat cooked to the point of dryness so it can sit on a shelf for 6 to 12 months is not healthy food. And I hear people often say, oh, I feed this brand of dog food, so it must be good. There is no such thing as a healthy kibble. Kibble is ultra processed no matter what. So, just keep that in mind when it comes to dogs and cats, especially when it comes to meat, as far as that goes. So, lorries and lorikeets. This is from a friend of mine that breeds almost every species of lorikeet that we have in the U.S. and just amazing flights and all kinds of food. And we grow flowers for those birds because lorries and lorikeets are nectar feeders. And so we feed them all different types of flowers that we grow ourselves. So if you're going to grow anything for birds, try flowers. They're not that hard to grow, and there's lots of different options for growing. But these are pansies and calendula, nasturtiums, cornflowers. This is a Japanese honeysuckle flower. There's some chamomile in here. So we mix that in and the birds go nuts. And all of our birds get some kind of flowers. Even for our tortoises, we have this whole pile of carbohydrates here, all of these fruits and vegetables and things like that. With lemurs, and I work for quite a few zoos that have those. And if you're talking, sorry, I just saw the chat's moving fast, so I can't keep up. But if you're talking about sprouting, we'll get there, I promise. But lemurs are actually pollinators in Madagascar. They go from palm to palm and they collect pollen and things like that. And so they lick it from these small flowers. And so we actually mix flowers into their food, which they absolutely love. And we developed a tea for them because much like my toucans, they are prone to iron storage disease as well. And so there's ways that we can stave that off. This is one of the zoos that I work for, one of the institutions I work for, and they offer diversity all the time for their little birds that are flying around their huge butterfly haven. And we have seen birds eat things that we didn't think they would eat. We've seen honey creepers, which are nectar feeders, come down and take all kinds of different foods that we didn't think they would consume. We've seen these finches take all kinds of foods that we didn't think they would consume. So when they have choices, it's amazing. And all of these birds have bred successfully for this institution more than they have ever seen. And even other types of zoo animals like koala get a diverse diet. Now we know koalas eat eucalyptus, but the zoos offer several different types of eucalyptus so that they have exposure to different nutrients within those plants that they're eating. So macronutrients, which are those proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, are really, really important. But we also have to consider what else is being carried along with those macronutrients. So, with tree nuts, you get some great fats, some great proteins, a little bit of carbs, but you also get a lot of micronutrients like minerals. Things like selenium in Brazil nuts and things like that are really important to birds that we can't replicate in many other foods. So we want to offer these in whole foods, not synthetic vitamins, and we want to offer these micronutrients, which also include phytonutrients that help, that are basically antioxidants, as well as enzymes that are going to help, with digestion, among other things. So the food sources are always better because the animal physiology can extract the nutrients that it needs from it because that's what the digestive system has evolved to do. So vitamins, minerals, those antioxidants that help keep cells healthy. Another type of antioxidant are bioflavonoids, and those are those strong pigments. And whenever I see the word bioflavonoid, I think of blueberries, I think of rose hips, things like that. The teas, if you're offering your bird teas to drink, you'll get lots of bioflavonoids in that as well. I'll talk about tea in a bit. But absorbability has to be considered. If the animal can't absorb the nutrient, it could cause problems. And either that compound itself will cause problems, or the lack of it will cause problems. And the immune system can tell the difference between these whole foods, how these nutrients that are in whole foods versus synthetic foods. Every species has a different requirement, and I would even argue every individual bird probably has a different requirement. And so offering a diverse diet is going to allow us to cover our bases and make sure that they're getting a host of different nutrients throughout the day, the week, the month. Now, one myth is that every animal has to eat all of the nutrients every single day. That's not true. It's not like they use up all their vitamin C in a day or all their vitamin, A in a day. It needs to get it within a certain period of time, but we don't know how to, we really don't know how that works as far as what we're offering in diets. So offering them a diverse diet every day allows them to make those choices based on their needs. So whole foods offer those important micronutrients, but they also offer other compounds that help the body absorb those important vitamins and minerals. And so they call that synergism or synergistic combinations. One study showed that if you fed cranberry extract, it didn't have the same impact as feeding the entire cranberry. So there's other compounds that help the vitamin C in cranberries, for example, be absorbed and used by the body instead of just an extract. And things like EGCG, which is epigallocatechin 3-gallate, that's a compound in green tea that they've extracted and called green tea extract, and now they offer that as a pill. You just need to drink your green tea. Green tea is going to be so much more beneficial for you because it has that whole complement of nutrients that will all support each other. So taking vitamins, and those of you that have taken like multivitamins is always questionable because you often just urinate a lot of it out, right? You take one type of pill, and then you have fluorescent yellow urine. It's just not right. You're getting rid of things that your body can't absorb. And so getting vitamins and minerals from food is really, really important for all animals. Now enzymes, there's two categories. Digestive enzymes are mainly secreted by the pancreas, almost entirely when it comes to birds. And they are needed to break down food. The pancreas secretes it into your small intestine. So after your saliva has broken down some of the carbohydrates and after your stomach has broken down a lot of the protein, and then it goes into your small intestine, the pancreas then secretes the rest and takes care of it. But birds are a little bit different. They don't have that amylase enzyme in their saliva to break down carbohydrates. So they're grinding everything down really, really small, and then they're swallowing it, and then it's going through the breakdown through enzymes in their digestive system. It also helps assimilation of food, so absorbing the food and using those nutrients is pretty important. Amylase enzymes break down carbs. We have those in our saliva. Lipases break down fats, and proteases break down proteins. And so one of the things that I always bring up is lactase enzyme is what breaks down the lactose sugar in dairy products like milk. But birds don't ever have that because birds aren't mammals and they don't even have the gene for it to produce it. And so even dogs and cats should never have dairy because any animal on earth after it's weaned from its mother stops drinking milk. But humans who have a mutation called lactase persistence, like me, keep producing the enzyme so I can still tolerate dairy. People that are lactose intolerant are actually normal. I have the mutation that makes me able to eat dairy, but a lot of other people don't, and that's really just the result of a mutation. Metabolic enzymes are found in food, and they're going to be found in whole food that's not been processed because heat will denature these enzymes. And we need these enzymes to help support the liver's natural process of detoxification and things like that. All raw foods have enzymes. but those enzymes typically denature, they fall apart above 110 degrees, which is above animal body temperatures, right? Above bird body temperatures. And so carnivores like dogs and cats will get all of the enzymes they need from raw meat diets, and birds, among others, will get it from plant sources. Sprouts are the richest known source of enzymes as far as plants go. And that's mainly because when a seed first begins to sprout, those enzymes are activated and they fuel growth. And so we're trying to capture those enzymes in that real small window before the seed becomes a full-fledged plant. So some of the most awesome things to sprout are garbanzos, alfalfa, millets, sesames, sunflower seeds sprout beautifully, and quinoa, you only need to soak it for 2 hours and it's ready to go, and wheat. Now, there is a lot of different types of sprouting mixes out there. You definitely want to get one that is specifically made for birds, though I've seen a couple out there that are using beans that shouldn't. ChinaPrairie.com probably has the highest quality sprout blends for both small and large birds, and I really appreciate the work that they've done in putting those together. But those sprouts, all of these things will be soaked in cool water and then drained, and that will allow them to sprout over a day or two. So just make sure you follow the directions when you buy a sprout blend very carefully, and you'll be just fine. So like I said, it's more about changing human behavior when we feed animals than it is changing the bird's behavior. Because the birds often have us trained better than we've trained them. And so just to give you a little bit of background. So lack of proper education is a problem because a lot of people just hop on a Facebook group and say, hey, what should I feed my bird? And then somebody says this and they're like, okay, great, I'm gonna go do that right now. You know, you really need to have a pretty wide swath of research when you're looking into what you should be feeding. We start small and we evolve, and we want to give consistent exposure of these food items to birds. The biggest mistake that I see any pet owner make is they put something in front of the bird, they're like, oh, it didn't eat it, and then that's it. They give up. Like, you can't do that. You have to be persistent, and it could take weeks or months to get some of this stuff into your bird. And a lot of it has to do with experimenting. So there's different ways to do this. And I'm gonna go through some of the foraging techniques and things like that later, but you know, you do want to keep in mind that just because you offer it once doesn't mean that bird's gonna not eat it ever again. So when I say start small, this here are soaked items. These are tree nuts, these are split peas. These were soaked for 8 hours overnight in cool water, rinsed and fed. That's it. So that's something very easy for pet owners to start with, because they can just do it the night before and then it's ready in the morning and they just have to rinse it and put it in, put it in a bowl. So that's something easy to do. But we want to try to, as we say in training, successive approximation. So this is a good place, but then we want to succeed to the next level, which is actual sprouting. And that means that you're taking these things and they're going another day or so and they're starting to sprout, which is a whole different set of nutrients now, because the nutrients are going to change as the plant is growing. And then we can graduate to even more, and these are microgreens. This is kale, little tiny leaves, and we can then clip those and offer those. And growing microgreens under a light in your house is super easy, and there's tons of different types of microgreens to offer. So all of this together offers different nutrient complements and different choices, different textures, different colors, things like that. So there's lots of different options now for you to try. And so, you know, we went from this first picture here that's just soaked tree nuts, walnuts, almonds, garbanzos, split peas, and, you know, we just soaked it overnight, rinsed it, and tried it out. And then allowing, you know, some of those things to go on beyond that and sprout, and then growing them into little tiny microgreens, and now you've got a whole different diverse complement of different nutrients here. So I was always, I'm an animal biologist. I'm not a botanist by any stretch of the imagination. My great uncle was a botanist. He was a botany professor, and he could grow anything in his backyard, and I never could. But then I really started pushing myself to find things that were fairly easy to grow. And some of the herbs, like this is basil. These are basil flowers. Really, any of the herbs you can offer to birds. Edible flowers I grow, and, you know, peppers and things like that. These are very easy to grow in containers right in your own backyard or on your patio or whatever. Very easy to do. And then your bird has this whole food. And when I say whole, I mean whole, like this whole branch of basil in its cage so that it can pick at it and chew at it and forage. Some of my largest birds have always loved to pick the little seeds off of these basil flowers. You know, with their tongue manipulating all these little tiny things. So those sorts of things are pretty easy to grow. Like I said earlier, these are flowers that I grow in my yard, along with some of the herbs like basil. And you know, any of the birds can consume these. If you have chickens, they'll eat all of this. I mean, chickens will eat anything. And then this is a dry mixture of things that I will then throw in with my food right before I feed it, the wet food, to absorb moisture. And it's just like organic rolled oats, some Ceylon cinnamon bark, some of the dry flowers from the teas, things like that, shredded coconut. And I can just throw that in. It absorbs moisture. It makes everything more crumbly, and the birds get all of these other food items piled onto that as well. So this is an up-close picture of one of my mashes. I tend to make, I don't know, a week or so worth. And then I keep it in a sealed container. And when I say sealed, I mean it has a rubber seal around the inner lid. Lock and Locks, I think, are one of the brand names where they snap down on all four sides. But that rubber seal, to really seal it in, is really important to keep food fresh. And you can also freeze this. And the rule of thumb for freezing, if you need to make a lot more food, you should try to use it up within the first couple of months. After that, you start to lose vitamins. Usually some of the B vitamins are the first to go. So freezing, you know, up to about 2 months or so is A-okay. It doesn't really do anything to the nutrient composition of any of the foods. It will change some of the integrity, which is why I then would go back to this, dry mix down here. And if I'm defrosting some of that mash, I can actually throw a handful of this in. It'll absorb the excess moisture, and then I can feed it then. So there's lots and lots and lots of options. Let's see. Okay, so if you've heard anything from my talk, I keep using the word diversity because it's critical. Dietary diversity is super important because it's enriching. It's important that birds fully understand that. Hang on a second, let's see. Okay, so it's really important that the birds have a varied complement of foods in a day. And often a way to get birds eating something is by mixing it with something they already recognize as food. If you just throw like a bunch of food together in a bowl, you don't know what you don't know that they're going to recognize some of those items as food. But if they already recognize some of those items as food, it's important. The same combination every day is not recommended. You should mix it up and keep them guessing. I'm sure some of you have birds at home who sit there and will wait for a certain food item and they'll go on strike. But you should always keep the bird's body guessing. Avoid being complacent and dependent. That's what we want to make sure, doesn't happen. Now, I don't have the chat open, so I don't know, but I'm sure somebody's complaining about this, right? Avocado. Parrots cannot have avocados, okay? Please listen again. Parrots should not have avocados. Parrots eat wild avocados, okay, in the wild. They eat them right off the trees. Southern California, you can literally watch parrots eating avocados off the trees. Here's why parrots can't have avocados in our homes. Avocados have evolved to ripen on the branch. If they are pulled from the branch so that they're unripe, so that they can last until they get to the grocery store, where they spray them with ethylene before they're distributed to the stores, which speed ripens them, the toxin that's natural in the unripe avocado doesn't go away. And that's why they're considered toxic to parrots. So parrots, for some reason, have a sensitivity to the toxin in avocados, but not all birds do. Zoos have been feeding avocados to all kinds of birds for decades with no issues whatsoever. But parrots are an exception. So I never, I always tell people, you should never feed avocados to your parrots, period. If you have other types of birds and it makes you even remotely uncomfortable to feed an avocado, don't feed an avocado. They can get all their nutrients from something else. It's not a problem. But a number of birds in the wild, including some parrots, eat avocados right off the trees. But it's because we speed ripen them to increase their shelf life that it seems to have caused a problem with the toxin. And so you should eat avocados all day long. Avocados are wonderful for people. But unfortunately, parrots can't consume them, which is a shame because avocados are one of the most nutritious things we probably could offer them. But because of how they're speed ripened in grocery stores, we can't offer them to parrots. So we just don't. No, and if I think I saw a comment pop up in the chat that avocado's bad. Avocado's not bad. Just don't offer it to parrots. People should be eating them. They're wonderful. They're super nutritious. They're great. Okay, so different things we soak and sprout. Quinoa. This is tricolored quinoa. There's 3 different color morphs. We can sprout those very easily. Different types. These are mung beans, which are easy to get in bulk. Lentils. Different types of grains. This is fenugreek. Peas are big birds love sprouted peas, love them. Soaked tree nuts. These are some sprouts with the flowers from the teas mixed in. Some people call this chop. It's just a lot of different types of vegetables all mixed together that we're going to mix in as well. More sprouts, and then I just have a big bin where I mix it all up for all of our birds, and they have all of these different components. So in one scoop, they're getting dozens of different types of food choices that day. But that scoop is going to be random because you don't know what they're going to get in the scoop tomorrow, for example. And so we want to keep it mixed up as much as we possibly can. This is a dry mix that we'll actually sprinkle in with the mash each morning. That has hemp seed, chia, ground flax, some sunflower hearts, some black sesame, and we'll just sprinkle that in, and those are great omega-3 sources, so they get that added nutrient to that as well. And sprouts are great for dogs and cats too. It offers fiber that helps with the digestive system. I have to offer lots of fruit because I have frugivorous birds as well, like the toucans, and I definitely think that fruit is really, really important. And, but once again, nothing should make up the predominant part of the diet. So when it comes to fruit, my parrots get about 15 to 20% fruit of a total daily diet or less. One thing for my parrots that I do is I offer them fruit seeds. So the inside of melons, which like honeydew, cantaloupe, any of the squashes, papayas, all of those seeds are edible. And that's one of the things that they actually have been seen eating in the wild. So Bonnie Zimmerman with Indonesian Parrot Project tells me all the time, like, we literally watch the lorikeets burrow into papaya just to get to the seeds. And so all of those edible seeds in melons, squashes, papaya, all of those are fine. You should avoid pits. Don't feed pits. Apple seeds are pretty benign. You know, if you're not comfortable, just don't feed the apple core. But they would have to consume lots and lots and lots and lots of apple seeds to ever show any kind of ill effect. But like I said, they don't need them, so why offer them? Watermelon seeds are fine. Any of those, melon seeds are just fine. But like I said, diversity. So I want lots and lots of diversity. And that's just a close-up of my fruit mix every week. We tend to vary it as much as we possibly can. So when it comes to processed foods, we need to look at what bioavailability is. What can they actually absorb? For humans, they actually looked at meats, and they found that the more cooked they were, the less nutritious they were. Now, my grandmother knew this because she never overcooked meat, and she denigrated anybody that did. But the more cooking, the more loss of nutrients. But it's not just that. It also has to do with what forms as a result. So processed foods, the more cooked or processed, the higher their carcinogen load, which are inflammatory compounds. And we don't want those compounds being fed to our animals or in us. Lots and lots of peer-reviewed research has shown evidence of what happens to food items when they're heated, and why raw or minimally processed is better. And it really is the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. There is no pet food company out there that tests for any of those carcinogens because they're not required to do so. And if they did, they would have to report those things. So no one's testing for those carcinogens, those inflammatory compounds that are a result of processing. So what we see is heterocyclic amines. We see those quite a bit in pet foods, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, advanced glycation end products. There's actually a $100,000 study going on right now showing all of the pet foods that contain those harmful carcinogen loads. And acrylamides. When you heat grain-based foods or seed-based foods or nut-based foods, the amino acid asparagine gets converted into this inflammatory compound called acrylamide. And so, avoiding heated grain-based foods, ultra-processed foods, is really, really important. Now, there's not many processed foods out there that are cold pressed. I know Top's parrot food, which has been around it's been around for a long time, way before I was doing anything with nutrition. But Top's parrot food is a cold pressed pellet, and therefore we don't have to worry about those types of things being in that food. And the other thing is that Top's doesn't claim that their pellet is a complete diet. So that's really, really important because there is no such thing anyway. But heated meat, grains, legumes, like beans, nuts, things like that can have a significant amount of the carcinogens in as a result of processing. These up here, these carcinogens have been linked to cancers, inflammatory conditions, atherosclerosis, kidney damage, muscle loss, nervous disorders, behavior disorders, reproductive disorders, all kinds of things. And so I really focus on the fact that I don't feed anything processed. Freeze drying and things like that's not considered processed because it's not heated. Heat seems to be the culprit. Now, are there things that we have to eat because they're heated? Yes, we have to heat meat, you know, things like that. We have to heat those because we haven't evolved to combat the microbes that grow on those types of things. But minimally, minimally cooked foods are, clearly better in some cases. Also, mycotoxins. So, how do I say this? I've heard people say that, well, I would rather cook the food so that it doesn't have fungal spores and things like that because it's safer. Mycotoxins, spores, are not inactivated by processing. Some fungal spores actually spread as a result of fire. So like some fungus require fire or something like that to disperse their spores so they can grow elsewhere. And so mycotoxins are not inactivated, especially when they're in grains, by heat. So it doesn't make them any safer. Okay, so I'm off my soapbox when it comes to processed food. Like I said, if you can find cold pressed, freeze dried, that's the best. Whole food in the form of sprouts and fruits and vegetables, that's going to be your greatest ally. Teas are another one that Dr. Becker and I have worked on for a long time. Animals consume water from things like this. If you're one of those people that like disinfects their water bowls 4 times a day because you're so worried about it, you can relax. They drink much worse things in the wild. But the animals often drink from tree hollows and notches in trees and puddles and things like that that have plant components in them. And this is not something that we just came up with. Zoos around the world have been offering teas to animals for a host of different benefits. And what Dr. Becker found when she was doing her internship for veterinary school was she worked at the Berlin Zoo in Germany, and they were using teas for all different types of animals, especially when it came to iron storage disease. And so zoos in this country are also using teas for that purpose, to stave off iron storage disease. But teas offer all kinds of beneficial compounds. So if we can get birds to drink up some nutrients, why would we not take that opportunity? And so we offer teas in a host of different ways. I cold brew my tea. I throw a handful of tea into a pitcher of filtered water. I stick it in the fridge. It's ready tomorrow. Very easy to do. I leave all the flowers and tea leaves and things like that in there, and no problem. The tannins are great for all kinds of different things, and not just for birds. We've used them with lots of different animals. My first black palm had, she was born with a heart murmur, and it was significant. And through a black tea regimen that we got her on, we reversed it till it was negligible. And Dr. Becker did quite a bit of work on that for me. And like I said, with the toucans, they need decaffeinated black tea in order to bind to the iron to keep it from seeding in the liver. These alligator snapping turtles, these are extinct in some states, and we are breeding them in captivity so that we can release them back into the wild. They come from tannin-rich water, so we actually brew tea in their aquaria for their health, and it does wonders. Even rhinoceros need tea because they're prone, they drink from a lot of water that's tannin-rich in the wild, and so we will add tea to their foods as well. And so the teas add other colors and textures and things like that, that is highly beneficial. Now, caffeine, let me just bring up caffeine real quick since we're talking about teas. I do an entire tea talk, and I'd be happy to come back and do that for you, but almost all teas that we offer never have caffeine. It's not a compound that you would find. Only one plant has caffeine, and that would be the plant that produces black, green, white, and oolong teas. As long as those teas are organically decaffeinated, they're completely fine. Caffeine's not going to kill birds. It's just a stimulant that we don't need to offer to birds. So, you know, if they get, people all the time tell me, oh, my bird loves to drink tea with me in the morning, and, you know, their bird's fine. Caffeine isn't like this toxin that's just going to kill your bird if it has a drop. But we offer only organically decaffeinated teas. But like the hundreds of other things that you can use as tea, like rose hips, rose petals, chamomile, calendula, none of those have caffeine in them. They never have, they never will. And so caffeine's a natural compound that just happens to be in that one plant that we get tea from. If you're not familiar with greywoodmanor.com, Greywood Manor teas, I actually formulated those teas for them. But they offer the best quality, and all of it is animal safe, and they also have teas for other animals. We've done teas for guinea pigs, rabbits, chickens, potbelly pigs, reptiles, you know, all kinds of things. So offering tea is definitely highly beneficial. Okay, so what do we need? We need whole raw food, we need fresh food, we need clean food, we need unadulterated, unprocessed food, and we need variety. What we don't need, and this is not going to be a surprise to anybody here, I'm sure, is added salt, fat, and sugars, especially what you see in processed foods. We don't need fried or heated foods of any kind. We don't need processed foods. Birds don't need any dairy whatsoever. I understand they probably love pizza, but they do not need that type of food. And they will not hate you for not giving them some. Please understand that. Additives and flavorings, colors, you know, artificial colors, things like that, they don't need any of that stuff. And then pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. They don't need any of those things. And so cleaning produce as best as you can is important. And it's not just for us, our pets, it's for us too. When it comes to cleaning, research has shown us that there is no surfactant that you can just mix, you know, spray on your fruit and vegetables and make it clean. You need to combine a surfactant with scrubbing. So if you're going to clean your produce, you use some kind of veggie wash. Apple cider vinegar by itself isn't going to cut it. You know, I typically will use vinegar and baking soda and let it, you know, fizz and everything like that. And then I use a Scotch pad, one of those green scrub pads, specifically for my produce. I don't use it for anything else but my produce. And I just hit everything real quick with a scrub. Now, please don't go home and scrub individual blueberries or grapes. Okay, don't do that. It's a waste of time. Just agitate them in a colander so that the friction between them rubs a lot of that stuff off. If you can buy organic, that's great. Organic is not free of all pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. But at least it's gone through some kind of review process. But you know, those are just some tips as far as cleaning produce. Because, you know, we have to do our best. GSE, grapefruit seed extract, is something that I use for my sprouts. And I've always had luck with it, and I've actually tested it in my lab, and it was the only thing that I got zero growth on. I tried apple cider vinegars with the mother. I tried other types of vinegars. I tried bleaches. I tried everything, and the only thing I got zero growth on was the grapefruit seed extract, which you can get at any health food store. But that probably sums up what I use to just clean produce. So things to add to your pet's diet: organic foods when they're available. You cannot find everything organic. Stop trying. Don't drive yourself insane. You just do your best. Sprouts and other fresh foods, teas, nuts, tree nuts, and those cold pressed oils that are in the refrigerated section. For carnivores, raw food diets, and there's lots of research online that you can look at for those if you have a dog or cat that you're concerned about. Raw bones are really important to dogs. They don't splinter or choke on those things like they would cooked bones, and they help keep their teeth clean and everything else, as well as teas and oils. So how do we get our birds eating things? You have to experiment. So first you have to think about biologically appropriate foraging. If you have a bird that grazes on the ground, you may want to consider offering food lower in the cage. If you have a bird that needs to be hanging upside down to reach food, you should be hanging food from the cage like on this skewer. You want birds to have to work. You are not hurting your bird by making it work for food. They need to be working for their food. So there's a million different enrichment ways to get these birds eating better things. I've had birds where they wouldn't touch diced fruit, but as soon as I put whole fruit on a skewer, all of a sudden they wanted to destroy it, and that got them eating it. Same thing with greens. Hanging whole greens in the cage over dicing it up real small because you have a small bird, you would be shocked at what they will try when it's in its whole form. And so it's definitely experimenting over time with the type of bird you have. So knowing what your species does, do they live a lot on the ground? Are they ground foragers? We know grays like to scratch around in the ground. I know Ann has told me that they've seen hyacinth macaws on the ground eating the seeds out of cow poop. Like there's all kinds. Don't feed your birds poop, but I mean they find food where they spend their time. And we've all seen the pictures of the hyacinths in the wild eating nuts that have fallen on the ground, things like that. So there's different receptacles that you can use for grazers on the ground. You can give them all kinds of boxes where they can rifle through things to get to the food underneath. Shredded papers and things like that to put food underneath is always great. Do not leave these in the cage at night. You don't want your bird to climb in and think it's nesting. You just want to offer it for foraging. Birds should never have anything to climb into. And I know some of you are emotionally attached to your happy huts and stuff like that. Birds should not have those. That just stimulates all kinds of things that we don't want to see. But they should have ways to forage, things to forage through to get food. Different types of bowls for grazers and browsers, birds that are going to eat from the ground or above. If you have a bird that likes to tip their bowl, those heavy ceramic bowls, those big dog bowls, are great because they can't flip them. They can't get a hold of them to flip them on the bottom, that sort of thing. Beak boxes like this one here that they could forage through. Hanging apparatus like this, the skewers are invaluable. They also have other types of foraging items where the birds have to work to get the food out of them. All kinds of different tools. You just have to know, what type of behaviors your bird exhibits so that you can give it those foraging opportunities. Dicing, shredding, chunking whole. So, I'm constantly shocked that when I throw in whole carrot tops, that these little finches and canaries just go berserk. They just go nuts, shredding it and pulling it apart. So don't underestimate what your bird can do. Give them whole food and see what form they prefer it in, and you'll get quite a bit. Okay, so stress is a part of life. We can't eliminate all stress, but birds in our environments, in our managed environments, we have the ability to control stressors much more easily than in the wild. So offering inappropriate foods are going to cause an animal's body to experience stress. Exposures to things in the home that they shouldn't be exposed to can lead to stressors. a lack of exercise, and things like that. So the more they have to cope with stress, the more important nutrition is, so that they have a good, strong foundation to respond to those stressors. The best source of all of these things is going to be from food in its whole form. Variety is absolutely critical, so that they have a chance to get all of those different things. And you want to be proactive and not reactive. Once a bird is plucking or self-mutilating, changing its diet may not solve the problem completely, because we're being reactive to that bird. But if we're proactive and we start birds off on really good, diverse diets, you're going to have a very well-managed, easy to care for bird. The basics for clients, when I talk to veterinarians, is that there's no one-size-fits-all diet. The ingredients and processing methods actually matter with any type of food that you're feeding. Diversity is critical to overall wellness, regardless of what species that you're feeding. Always looking for fresh sources of information, as well as goal setting. So if you have someone you're working with and you're trying to get their birds to eat better, set small goals. Maybe you're just going to soak some certain food items overnight and then offer them the next day, and then you can graduate to sprouting, which is not difficult to do once you've done it a couple of times. Those sorts of things are really, really important. And you can change a bird's diet at any time. You just have to be careful. Offering them food, making sure they're eating it. And I mean, some people have gone cold turkey and they've just switched their bird's diet to something like sprouts. And if the bird's eating it right away, you're gold. Like, you can just keep adding more and more whole foods to that diet until they're on a completely whole food diet. So I have a Facebook group which has lots of information, lots of examples, lots of success stories. We're over 13,000 members now, and it's the same title as the talk today, Avian Raw Whole Food Nutrition. So you can definitely join that and join the conversation. I have a membership program as well that dives deep and has online classes about what the foods we feed to birds actually are, and that sort of thing. And that's at my website as well, which you can search for on the Facebook group as well. You can follow Dr. Karen Becker online. Just search for Dr. Karen Becker. You can't miss her. And her and I have been wonderful friends and colleagues for 20 years. And we just learned so much from each other. It's been wonderful to collaborate with someone like her. I also run collaborating for Avian Wellness, C4AW, and that's at c4aw.org. And you can actually purchase bundle boxes that consist of 100% unprocessed food. You can get it all in one box. You don't have to order from several different vendors and pay shipping from everybody. And that's a good place to start, because we've hand selected those products that are not processed. We also have bundle boxes for foraging items, where you can get skewers and other things all bundled together in a box, and use those over and over and over again to get your birds eating better foods. And that's it. Sorry I talked so long.
Thanks, Jason. We have lots of questions.
Okay.
All right. I've tried to kind of group them all together. Like, there were lots of questions about mealworms. I know
there's always lots of questions about mealworms.
Yeah, because you can get them live, freeze dried, etc. I know a lot of them come from China, which is kind of risky. But what is the best source that you recommend for them?
So any live mealworms that are grown in this country, through, there's lots of online businesses that offer mealworms. They all go through quality control, so those are generally just fine. I tend to order them online from a place that specializes in edible insects versus going to a pet store where I don't know how long they've been there. If you want freeze-dried, the only freeze-dried bugs that I found that are truly freeze-dried are from flukerfarms.com. And they have mealworms and crickets, I know for sure. And those also come in those bundle boxes that we just started putting together as part of a dry mix. So those are, flukerfarms.com is probably one of the best.
Somebody wanted to know if they needed to be dusted with calcium like they are for reptiles.
No, they're getting, if you're feeding a diverse diet, you're getting all of that other stuff in other foods, so you don't have to worry so much about that. I will tell you, if you're feeding live mealworms, you can gut load them with, you know, I feed them all kinds of things, kale and sweet potatoes and all kinds of stuff, so that they're taking on those nutrients and they're being carried up the food chain. Because we know birds in the wild eat grubs and things like that that they're extracting from tree bark. Bonnie Zimmerman actually told me about the cockatoos that, you know, she's like, you don't have to look long, they just pick the larvae right out of the tree bark. And so those things are all eating plant components, and then those nutrients are being carried up the food chain. So if they're, you know, I tend to feed my mealworms better than I do.
That makes sense. And then someone wanted to know about seaweed related foods and whether those are good sources for, you know, omegas, etc.
I don't know that much about seaweed because it's just not very accessible when it comes to other, you know, foods. I mean, on the surface, I don't see anything wrong with it. I don't know necessarily what the birds would get from it, but I don't think there's any inherent dangers with the seaweeds that are offered as food.
Okay. And then there were quite a few questions about flax, milled flax versus flax seed versus flax oil. What are your thoughts on that?
So I use ground flax mainly for the fiber component, because by the time the bird grinds up and consumes the flaxseed, it's so fibrous that they don't get much benefit out of it. Little tiny birds might, but like, you know, giving them a claw of flax seeds and making them work for all of that, it's probably moot. So with the bigger birds, I tend to use the flaxseed oil because then they get that, it's just higher impact when it comes to that oil. But extracting that from whole flax seeds it's a lot of work for minimal benefit.
You don't think that with their ventriculus and their own internal, you know, disposal, that they're able to get what they need out of?
They would just have to eat a lot of them. So like I said, you can offer them, and the fiber is phenomenal. Like they need that fiber. But to get the oil, the omega-3 component, they would have to consume a lot.
Okay.
Which is why the oil is usually
the best.
A bit better,
yeah. Speaking of oil, coconut oil, tell us how you recommend delivering that, in what ways?
Off a spoon. I mean, the birds seem to love it. And you know, with small birds like parrotlets or lovebirds, you know, a couple of drops is all they need to see benefits. With medium-sized birds, you know, a quarter teaspoon or half a teaspoon is more than enough. And with larger birds, you know, 3/4 of a teaspoon is more than enough. But when it comes to offering, I mean, I've tried it a myriad of different ways. I've put just a chunk on their food. I've melted it, and because it doesn't denature when you heat it, it's one of the reasons why it's so good to cook with. But I drizzle it over food, and when the food is cold, it kind of solidifies on the food, and then they consume it that way. So, I mean, my cop-out answer is typically whatever way they'll eat it is the best way to give it. So, experiment, try different ways.
I remember a few years ago, you were so excited when coconut oil was starting to be sold as a liquid and not just.
Yeah.
And I think at that point you were talking about stirring it into the raw fruit mix to some extent.
Yep.
Basically, for our listeners, any which way is good.
Yeah. Yeah. Seeing that they eat, that so little actually makes it down their gullet is, any way that you can get it is good. It's hard to give a dosage when you're putting it on food because you have no idea how much you're actually going to consume. So roughly those amounts that I gave you would be ingested, how much they actually ingest.
Is there a possibility of giving too much?
There's a possibility of giving too much with anything. Anything. And so if they're getting lots and lots of different food items every day, you're going to avoid that altogether.
Spices. We all love spices. What are your favorite ones and how do you deliver those?
Oh, gosh. So I use curcumin, turmeric. I actually shred the roots, that and ginger. I'll shred the roots and mix that in with food.
With the skin on the ginger?
Yeah, I wash it like any produce, yeah. I've had birds that like to just destroy those roots, so I'll just give them a whole chunk of it and let them destroy it. Gosh.
Great for traveling, guys, for those of you listening with birds.
That ginger.
Yeah.
Lavender flower is probably the best thing for traveling because you can brew that as tea and get them to drink it, or just throw handfuls of dried lavender flowers in their crate, and just the odor helps deter nausea.
That's great.
And so that's something that's lavender. They sell lavender oil that you can dip for dogs and cats on this little medallion on their collar so that they smell the oil and it keeps them from getting car sick. We even throw handfuls of that in chicken coops and nest boxes, like anywhere that a bird is going to spend some time. We tend to throw handfuls of lavender in there. Chickens love it. They love it.
And other spices, maybe like cinnamon and...
Yeah, Ceylon cinnamon, we use a lot because the birds like to destroy it.
How about cinnamon sticks?
Yeah, Ceylon comes in cinnamon sticks. The cinnamon that they typically put in commercially available pet food is cassia cinnamon. The difference, so when you're looking at the two cinnamons, one is very smooth and one looks literally like it was just peeled off a tree. It's like really rough bark. That's the one you want, the rough bark, the Ceylon. Cassia cinnamon is higher in coumarins, which are blood thinners. The bird would have to eat a significant amount of it to show any ill results. So don't, if your bird has a cinnamon stick and you don't know what it is, it's probably not the end of the world. But Ceylon cinnamon is much better. And if you have any kind of Indian market, things like that, they sell Ceylon cinnamon almost exclusively.
An Indian market, anywhere online that you recommend?
No, I mean, any place, there's tons of places that sell Ceylon cinnamon, so. Okay.
And how do you feel about brewer's yeast? Somebody wanted to know that.
It's fine. I don't offer it. I have never needed it. But it's not anything that you should worry about.
Value.
Yeah, there's probably some nutritional value to it for parrots. Yeah.
Do you have a food you recommend for preventing yeast? You know how a lot of birds get yeast and it can be so hard to treat that kind of fungal infection. Do you have good preventative foods you recommend?
So omega-3 fatty acids are going to help that immune system balance and keep the sugars as low as possible if you have a recurring yeast problem. I see yeast infections with birds on grain-based foods, whether it's pellets or whatever, especially because so many pellets add sugars to them. And yeast loves sugar. So I typically do something along those lines where I just, kind of limit the sugar and then increase the essential fatty acids so that the immune system can do its job.
Have you ever used DMG, which is a great immune booster?
No, I have not.
How about what's your feeling about eggs? It's a
Um,
cooked food, so
yeah, I don't feed eggs. um, I don't think there's any reason to feed eggs.
okay. Somebody wants to know if you had any recipes.
I don't, and I'll tell you why. If I was to come up with a recipe that had specific amounts, people would be less likely to vary the diet from batch to batch, and I don't want to encourage that. So, um, we have all kinds of examples of things that you can put into your mix, whether it's I feed fresh food in the morning, so my sprouts, my veggies, my fruits, all those sorts of things are in the morning. And then in the evening, they get a dry mix that has some seeds, some tree nuts, some freeze-dried fruits and veggies, some dried insects, things like that. But they always have dozens of choices in front of them. So I tend to want to keep that random.
How long do you leave your fresh food in the cage? Of course, it depends on where you live and what kind of weather,
Yeah,
of course, but
yeah.
in general.
In general, I mean, if you work an 8-hour day, if you put enough food in there that they're going to eat within the first couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours, I have always left my food out during the day, and I have never had any health issues as a result. I don't think we have to worry as much about like bacteria and fungus growing on food over hours. I mean, over a day is a problem, right? We start to see things, but to see mold or something growing on food that's been out for 6 hours is you're not going to see that. So I try to put enough food in there that they're going to eat the first few hours, and then they typically just don't eat the rest.
We have the same experience, even though people say no more than 4 hours. I mean, it's usually 8 to 10 hours. No problem.
These birds are not fragile little beings that aren't survivors. I mean, they live in a really rough world, so I just don't think we give the birds enough credit. They eat all kinds of bacteria and fungus in the wild. Another thing that is a big myth is that mushrooms are dangerous to birds. If they're edible for us, they're completely safe for our birds. And some mushrooms even have a vitamin D benefit. You can put mushrooms in the sun and they start producing vitamin D. You can feed those to your birds. They're completely safe. There's nothing dangerous about them, but because people know that they're a fungus, another F word, right? They're dangerous. They're not. They're totally fine. And I'm actually working with China Prairie right now to produce a powder that has some of that mushroom component in it so that they can get vitamin D in a whole food form instead of a powder, a synthetic powder or something. Yeah.
I love that. Dr. Ores agrees. She thinks they need mushrooms too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's Dr. Lefebvre's website. He has a veterinarian that wrote something about mushrooms on there. And
it might have been her. It's one of her things she likes.
I think it was somebody else, but I know I've talked to Dr. Orr about that. So
yeah. What about any kind of specialized diets, like for feather pluckers, especially our eclectus friends who tend to be feather pluckers and they need that fresh food? Any recommended food?
With eclectus, diversity, fiber is desperately needed because I can guarantee, and part of my research coming up in the next couple of years is looking at bird microbiota and seeing like what's the difference if a bird is on fresh foods, whole foods versus processed foods. How does that change their gut? All those things that we need to survive in our gut. How does it change their gut? And with eclectus, they're so diet sensitive. One of my first big birds was an eclectus, and I woke up in the middle of the night to what I thought was a dripping sink. But it was actually him toe tapping on a stainless steel bowl because he was having a nervous reaction to the eclectus special pellet diet that I bought, thinking, hey, I mean, this is 25 years ago, but thinking this is appropriate for them, right? And as soon as Dr. Becker said, you know what, no more pellets, it completely stopped. And that fiber in eclectus digestive tracts is so important. So I think sprouts, whole foods, all these whole foods are extremely beneficial. And I think that omega-3 fatty acids are one of the main reasons that we see diet-related plucking, because the bird is inflamed and it does, like, we can't tell it's inflamed from the outside, but it's driving itself insane, right? Nervous tissue needs omega-3 fatty acids, and those are the things that are most lacking in all bird diets. And part of the reason is people are scared to feed fat because professionals are out there telling them not to feed fat, and that drives me insane.
Right.
I think that's abuse, to be honest.
Right. You got to differentiate between the good fat and the bad fat. No doubt about it. We know some great research going on in Italy on gut health and probiotics. We need to connect you.
Yeah, totally.
Freeze-dried vegetables or fruits. I mean, worst case, especially when people start to go back to work after this COVID crazy time. What do you think about some of the freeze-dried options?
Definitely a secondary choice. They should have moisture-rich foods during the day. Birds cannot survive on freeze-dried foods.
Can you mix the freeze-dried in with, say, the raw fruits?
I mean, you could, yeah, you can rehydrate those. The texture's different, so sometimes the birds don't go for it. But freeze-dried foods they're gonna maintain as much nutrient as you can from a dried food, but they should not replace moisture-rich foods. We give freeze-dried foods in the evening after they've had access to fresh foods during the day.
It'd be safer to just put a chunk of butternut squash and a
Yeah.
sprout on a skewer. Yeah,
Absolutely. Anything they can destroy. We do the same thing for like our turtles and tortoises and things. We put, we hang a squash or a pumpkin, and they just spend all day tearing it apart, anything that can get them working for their food.
Yeah. Somebody wanted to know if raw sweet potatoes were okay versus cooked, because there's some controversy about that.
Yeah. Raw sweet potato is not going to kill anything. It's totally fine. Sweet potatoes are one of those exceptions to where you can increase the bioavailability of the nutrients by like lightly steaming it. But feeding raw sweet potato is not going to hurt anybody.
They have a phytoestrogen aspect, don't they? Could that be?
Yeah, I mean,
some birds.
Yeah, it's not terrible. I mean, as long as you're not feeding like a whole sweet potato to a bird, but adding it as part of a diverse mix is not a problem.
Okay. And somebody wanted to know if they could do raw quinoa instead of sprouted or cooked.
Do they mean dry?
Yes.
Okay, so dry quinoa is pretty accurate. It's bitter. Birds don't tend to go for it. It's completely fine to offer, but it's better if you just soak it for 2 hours and then rinse and feed. Quinoa is one of those really easy foods to feed.
It sprouts.
You get a lot of sprouted. Yeah, spouted's always better. But just soaking it for a couple hours in cool water, rinsing it and feeding it is totally fine. One of the things that I often will do to trick birds into good nutrition is I'll take like a chunk of banana and I'll roll it and press it into something like soaked quinoa so that it coats the outside, and then it kind of forces them to taste it when they're going for the banana. So, I'm all about trying to trick them into eating better foods.
That's a great idea. Somebody asked about homegrown avocados versus store-bought, if that would solve the toxicity problem.
I won't say either way. It's one of those things where, a lot of unripe things are toxic or nutrient poor because the plant doesn't want an animal eating it until the seeds inside are mature. Because the whole reason a plant produces fruit is to get a bird or something else to carry that seed someplace else and plant it for it. If we didn't have birds in the rainforest, there'd be no rainforest because those trees are all getting planted in poop, right?
Right.
So with avocados and other things that are that have some kind of toxin in them, I mean, there's lots of things that we feed that have toxins in them that just don't hurt birds. Avocado seems to be an exception. And have I seen parrots eat avocados? Yes. Have they survived? Yes. Does that mean that there was as much toxin in that avocado as there could be from one of the random ones at the grocery store? Who knows? We don't have any way of testing that. So just, we avoid avocados with parrots altogether. But like I said, it's a shame because that's one of the most nutritious things a parrot could probably benefit from. But because we're unsure of how they're processed, and my aunt lives in San Diego. I mean, I literally watched the parrots come in, the wild parrots there, and eat the avocados off the trees. Like, they're not dying. The birds are not dropping out of the sky. They know when to feed. They know when to eat them.
Right.
And so, it's really how we're feeding them, when we're feeding them is the issue. And once that avocado is pulled from the tree and it's unripe, it doesn't have the opportunity to ripen naturally. And that's really where the problem lies.
I think one of my most significant experiences on one of our echo tours was sitting under a mango tree and watching all the green wings eat the seed out of the young mango, and drop it to the ground so the pigs could eat the pulp.
Yep.
But like you say, it depends on where they are in the ripening phase. I don't think, we could get that kind of mango anywhere that they could safely eat. It had to be at a certain time of growth on the tree safely.
Yeah, and birds have evolved to recognize when those things are ready.
Exactly.
And that's why, I don't feed anything with pits, but I do, my birds love papaya seeds and honeydew and cantaloupe seeds. Any of the squash seeds, pumpkins are coming up,
Yeah.
Just cut a pumpkin in half, throw it on a skewer, leave the seeds in there, and let your bird have at it. I mean, there's so much benefit to that.
Yeah. Vitamin A, mega.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've gone over. I didn't even pay attention to time. Michelle, do you need to do anything to close us out here? And of course, Jason, you are once again so generous with your time.
Oh, of course.
Just one last question, because you're the tea guy. If somebody wanted to know if there was a time limit that you recommended for leaving the teas in the cage.
And there's a really easy rule of thumb. I leave teas are a fresh food, so I leave them in along with my fresh food. And when I pull the bowls of fresh food, I pull the tea and give them clean water the rest of the day.
Not tea.
So sorry?
Not tea at that point. So overnight, if you had left liquid overnight, it would be water versus tea.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Right.
That's
So they get tea in the morning with their fresh food. And then when I pull their fresh food bowl, I pull their tea bowl and I give them fresh water and their dry mix for the rest of the day.
Very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
This is great, as always. We love you.
And I know I apologize that it was so much information, but I just wanted to give you as much bang for your buck as I could today. So I hope this was beneficial.
Will you come
Even
back?
if you take one thing away.
Will you come back for number 6?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us today too, as well as, of course, Dr. Crean. And we, again, just try to focus on, because there was a lot of information shared today. Take 1 or 2 things that you can start with, whether it be soaking some seeds or soaking some of those mung beans and sprouting them for your birds. Take a few things and start introducing them into your diet. Do a little something. And as I've said a few times in chat and Q&A, barring any technical snafus, this recording will be available afterwards too, so you can watch it again and again and get more ideas and things to implement at home, because it is so information rich. We couldn't possibly ourselves absorb it in our brains all at once. But I invite, of course, we'd love to have Jason back again. And I hope you all will join us next week too. Next Sunday, we have a veterinarian, Dr. Carruthers, talking about avian emergencies. So these talks, we just want you to always keep learning for birds and doing more for your birds. And once more, thank you for spending your Saturday afternoon with us for birds.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Good to see you, Jason.
You too. Thank you.